The folder sat closed on the table between us, and nobody in that room would tell me what was inside it. "Lieutenant, are you aware what she actually did?" Colonel Grace Hutchins asked the question like she already knew the answer would ruin someone's evening, and she wasn't in a hurry to find out whose. 3 officers sat at the long table across from me, papers squared in front of them, coffee going cold. Master Sergeant Tom Bragg sat 2 chairs down from me, jaw tight, eyes fixed on that folder like he wanted to reach across the table and open it himself. Behind me, near the door, stood a woman I hadn't expected to see again so soon, Captain Sarah Whitfield, arms crossed, refusing to meet my eyes. I didn't know yet who she was. I didn't know what was in the folder. I only knew that 30 hours earlier, I'd been standing in a ballroom 2 buildings over, holding a medal I hadn't fully believed I deserved, while a woman in a navy blue dress leaned toward her friends and said just loud enough for the room to catch it, she only got that award through favors. Please subscribe my Brave Lady channel and also write in comment from where are you watching. Thank you. I'm First Lieutenant Maya Reyes, United States Army, and at the time all this happened, I'd spent 6 years learning that the Army doesn't usually hand you a second chance to defend your name. You get one moment, if you're lucky, where the truth and the timing line up. I didn't know that moment was 30 hours away. I only knew that in that ballroom, under gold lighting and the smell of rented catering trays, I had just been quietly, publicly erased. I want to tell you how I got both of those rooms, the ballroom and the review board, and what happened in between. I'd been stationed at Fort Callahan for 2 years by then, assigned to the Logistics and Operations Directorate under Colonel Richard Colson, a soft-spoken commander 2 months from retirement who had a habit of tapping his pen twice before he spoke, like he was giving himself permission. I was 29, a first lieutenant with a background in supply chain operations that had, 6 months earlier, gotten unexpectedly complicated. I'd been pulled onto a joint logistics task force rerouting medical supply chains during a regional deployment surge, 3 months of 18-hour days, rerouted convoys, a spreadsheet that turned into a small war of its own, fought entirely in conference rooms and secure phone lines. Nobody outside that task force saw much of what it took. That was sort of the point. Logistics work is invisible until it fails. At the end of it, I was awarded the Meritorious Service Medal, and Colonel Colson personally recommended me for early promotion consideration. I remember being surprised at how quiet the achievement felt. No parade. Just a folder of paperwork and a colonel telling me, in his tapping pen way, "You kept people alive who'll never know your name, Lieutenant. That's the job." My personal life, around that time, was uncomplicated in the specific way military life sometimes gets, meaning I didn't have much of one outside the uniform. My younger brother had just had his first kid, and I'd been texting my sister-in-law about flight leave for a visit. 2 months out, promise, I wrote her the week before the retirement dinner. I owe that baby an aunt who actually shows up. The retirement dinner was supposed to be simple. Colonel Colson's send-off, held in the officers' club ballroom, string lights over round tables, a slideshow of his career looping on a screen near the bar. I hadn't expected to be recognized publicly that night. The medal ceremony had already happened weeks earlier in a much smaller room. But partway through his remarks, Colonel Colson stopped, looked out at the tables, and said he wanted to publicly thank the officer who'd made his final deployment cycle the smoothest of his career. He asked me to stand. I stood. People clapped. I remember the warmth of that moment distinctly, because of how fast it curdled. I was making my way back from the small round of handshakes near the stage, medal ribbons still pinned crooked on my dress blues from where I'd fixed it too quickly in the bathroom mirror, when I passed a cluster of officers' spouses near the dessert table. I recognized Deborah Colson immediately, the colonel's wife, a woman with sharp cheekbones and sharper opinions, known on base for running the Officers' Spouses Club with the efficiency of a small government. She was mid-sentence to 2 other women I didn't know well, her voice pitched at that particular volume people use when they want to be technically discreet and actually be heard. "She only got that award through favors," Deborah said, not quite looking at me, which somehow made it worse. The 2 women beside her went quiet in that uncomfortable way people do when they've just watched something land. One of them, I'd learn later, was Captain Sarah Whitfield. I didn't stop walking. I didn't confront her. Every instinct I had, 6 years of training told me to keep my expression level and my pace steady, because a scene at a retirement dinner would cost me more than silence would. I made it to the hallway outside the ballroom before I let my hands shake. I didn't know, standing in that hallway, that the sentence Deborah Colson had just said out loud would take on a life of its own in less than a day. I didn't know that 30 hours later I'd be sitting across from a colonel I'd never met, watching her open a folder that would either end my career or hand it back to me completely changed. I only knew, in that moment, that something in the room had shifted, and that I was going to have to find out exactly how far it had already spread. It spread fast, and it spread with help. By 8 the next morning, I already had a sense something was wrong. I walked into the operations building and the room did the thing rooms do when they've been talking about you, a conversation stopping half a beat too late, someone suddenly very interested in their coffee. Master Sergeant Tom Bragg was the only person who looked at me straight on. Bragg had worked logistics under 3 different commanders in his 18 years of service, had a laminated photo of his daughter's little league team taped inside his binder, and had a habit of saying exactly what he thought in the driest voice imaginable. He fell into step beside me in the hallway. "You hear what's going around?" he asked. "I heard the start of it," I said. "Last night." "It's not the start anymore," Bragg said. "Give it a day, it'll have wings." He wasn't wrong. By that afternoon, Major Ellis Cho, a logistics officer I'd worked alongside for over a year, someone I'd considered, if not a close friend, at least a reliable colleague, stopped by my desk with an expression I couldn't quite place. Cho had passed over for the same task force assignment I'd been selected for 6 months earlier, a fact I hadn't thought much about until that day. "People are saying some things," Cho said, arms crossed. "About the medal. About you and the colonel." "About me and the colonel," I repeated flatly. "I'm not saying I believe it," Cho said, which is the kind of sentence that means the opposite. "I want to be clear about something, because it matters for what came later. There had never been anything between Colonel Colson and me beyond a working relationship built on long hours and a shared, unglamorous obsession with getting supply lines right. The insinuation Deborah Colson had planted with 6 words at a dessert table had already, in less than 18 hours, mutated into something uglier than what she'd actually said. That's how rumors work in a closed environment like a base. They don't need much fuel. They generate their own. I called Bragg that evening, off-duty, from my apartment, because I needed to hear it from someone who wasn't performing neutrality at me. "Tell me honestly," I said. "How bad is it?" "Honestly," Bragg said. "Cho's been talking. Not just repeating it, adding to it. I heard him tell someone in the motor pool that you'd been awfully close with the colonel during the task force. That's not what Deborah said. That's Cho's flourish." Something cold settled in my stomach. "Why would he do that?" "Man's been passed over twice," Bragg said. "Draw your own conclusions." I didn't sleep well that night. I kept replaying Deborah's sentence, turning it over, trying to understand what she'd actually meant by favors, professional favoritism, or something uglier. I didn't get an answer that night. I got a worse question instead, the next morning, when I found an email waiting in my inbox from the Inspector General's office, requesting I appear for a preliminary informal inquiry regarding concerns raised about the awarding process of my Meritorious Service Medal. Someone had filed a complaint. Formally. In writing. I sat at my desk holding my coffee, not drinking it, staring at that email until the words stopped looking like words. 6 years of quiet, careful work, and it had taken 1 sentence at a dessert table to put my name in front of an Inspector General. I went to see Colonel Colson before anyone official summoned me anywhere. I found him in his office, boxes already half-packed for retirement, a framed photo of his unit face down on the desk waiting to be wrapped. "Sir, I need to ask you something directly," I said, closing the door behind me. "Did your wife say I only got my award through favors?" Colson's pen-tapping habit kicked in immediately, twice against the desk, a pause, like he was steadying himself. "I heard about that," he said quietly. "I'm sorry, Lieutenant. That's not something I said, or believe." "There's an IG inquiry now," I said. "Someone filed a complaint." Something flickered across his face, not surprise, exactly. Recognition. I didn't file anything, he said. And I don't believe Deborah would either, not formally. She says things. She doesn't usually put them on paper. Then who did? He didn't answer that. He looked, for the first time since I'd known him, like a man who suspected something he didn't want to say out loud. I left his office more unsettled than when I'd walked in. That was the moment I decided to stop waiting for information to come to me. I requested a meeting with the base's assigned defense counsel, not because I was being formally charged with anything yet, but because Bragg had told me, in his flat, practical way, "You don't wait for the fire to reach you, Lieutenant. You go find where it's starting." The defense counsel was a soft-spoken JAG captain named Priya Anand, who listened to my entire account without interrupting once, then set down her pen and said, "Here's what we do first. We don't panic, and we don't get emotional in any room they put you in. Every conversation from here forward, you assume is being written down somewhere, because it probably is. Second, an informal inquiry needs a paper trail to become a formal one. Someone submitted something in writing. I want to know exactly what that document says, and who signed it. Can we find that out?" "I can request it," Anand said. "You can't. Not directly. But I want you doing something else in the meantime. I want you documenting everything about that task force assignment. Every metric, every email, every approval signature that led to that medal. If someone's building a narrative that it wasn't earned, we're going to bury that narrative in receipts." It was the calmest advice I'd gotten in 2 days, and it was exactly what I needed, not comfort, but direction. I spent that evening doing something that, in hindsight, was the pacing breath before everything got worse. I went back to basics. I pulled my old task force files, cross-referenced convoy manifests against delivery timestamps, rebuilt the exact chain of decisions that had gotten medical supplies to 3 forward locations 2 weeks ahead of a deteriorating security window. It was tedious, unglamorous work, spreadsheets and timestamps, nothing dramatic, but there was something steadying about it. This was the job. This was what I was actually good at. For one evening, at least, I wasn't thinking about dessert tables and whispered sentences. I was thinking about pallets and manifests, the language I trusted. The next injustice arrived 2 days later, and it was worse than gossip. Anand called me into her office, her expression carefully neutral in a way I'd already learned to read as bad news. "I got the complaint document," she said, sliding a printed page across the desk. "I want you to read the attribution line before anything else." I read it. My stomach dropped. The complaint hadn't been filed by Deborah Coulson. It had been filed by Major Ellis Cho, under his own signature, alleging that my meritorious service medal recommendation had been improperly influenced by personal favoritism from the recommending commanding officer, and citing, as supporting evidence, an email exchange between Colonel Coulson and me that had been, I read it twice to be sure, edited. "Edited how?" I asked. "Selectively excerpted," Anand said. Timestamps and subject lines pulled from a real email chain, but reassembled to remove context. Whoever built this took a real conversation about task force logistics and cut it down to make it read like something else. "Cho wouldn't know how to access my email," I said slowly. "He's not on that distribution list. He wasn't part of the task force." Anand watched me connect it. "Someone gave him the material," I said. "That's my read too," she said. "But I can't prove sourcing yet. What I can tell you is this forged or selectively edited documentation used to support a false formal complaint isn't gossip anymore, Lieutenant. That's a serious problem for whoever's fingerprints end up on it. Which means, right now, more than ever, stay clean. Stay quiet. Let the paper trail work." I left her office that day carrying 2 competing feelings: fear, because a fabricated document with my name on it was now sitting in an official file, and something sharper underneath the fear, the beginning of anger, cold and useful, the kind that doesn't make you reckless, it makes you precise. Whoever had built that email excerpt had access to a real conversation. Which meant they'd had access to something that should have been protected. Which meant this had never really been about a retirement dinner sentence at all. Someone had been planning this before Deborah Coulson ever opened her mouth. That same week, a second document surfaced, not through Anand's official channel, but slipped under the door of my apartment in a plain envelope, no return address. Inside was a printed copy of my original promotion recommendation packet, with a sticky note attached in handwriting I didn't recognize. Ask who signed off on the funding line. A friend. I brought it straight to Anand the next morning. She read it twice, frowning. "This is real," she said. "This is the actual internal funding approval for your task force stipend, the kind of document that doesn't leave finance channels unless someone with access wanted you to see it." She tapped the signature block at the bottom. This authorization line was co-signed by Colonel Coulson and countersigned by Base Finance. Nothing irregular here. Which means whoever sent you this wasn't trying to expose wrongdoing. They were trying to hand you proof there wasn't any anonymously, because they were scared to put their name on it. "Someone on base wants me cleared," I said slowly, "but doesn't want to be seen helping me." "That tells us something too," Anand said. "Whoever this is has more information than they're willing to risk their own standing to share directly. I want you to think hard about who might have access to a document like this and a reason to stay quiet about handing it to you." I didn't land on an answer that day. But it planted something, a suspicion, faint and unconfirmed, that more than one person on base already knew the complaint against me didn't hold up, and had known it for longer than they'd let on. Captain Sarah Whitfield found me 3 days later, in the break room of the operations building, and for a moment I thought I was about to get another dose of second-hand gossip. Instead, she looked like someone working up the nerve to say something she didn't want to say. "I need to tell you something," she said, "and I need you to let me finish before you react." I set down my coffee. "Go ahead." "Deborah Coulson didn't just say that thing about you at the dinner," Whitfield said. "She's been saying versions of it for weeks. Before the dinner. To me, specifically. She told me, privately, back in the spring, that she was worried about her son. Her son. Derek. His active duty, different post, came up for a promotion board around the same time your task force wrapped. He didn't get it. Deborah told me she thought the board had favored certain officers with visible task force wins over her son's more traditional record. She was angry about it for months. I didn't think much of it at the time. Parents get protective, especially military parents watching their kids compete for slots. But then your medal happened, and your promotion recommendation went in around the same window Derek's went in and got denied again. I felt the shape of it forming before she finished. She thinks I took something that was supposed to be his. I think so, Whitfield said. I didn't put that together until this week, when I heard about the IG complaint. I should have said something sooner. I didn't, because she stopped, jaw tight. Because when she first said that thing about favors, back in the spring, I believed her. I didn't know you. I didn't check it. I just believed a colonel's wife over a lieutenant I'd never worked with, and I let that belief sit there for months without questioning it. I'm not proud of that. It would have been easy to be angry at her. Some part of me was. But there was something in the way she said it, not performing guilt, just stating a fact about herself she didn't like, that made me believe she meant it. "Why tell me now?" I asked. "Because Ellis Cho asked me for copies of old task force scheduling emails last month," Whitfield said. "Said he was doing an audit. I didn't think anything of it at the time. I do now." That was the piece Anand needed. I called her before Whitfield had even left the break room. Anand's tone, when I told her, was carefully controlled excitement, the tone of a lawyer who has just watched a case stop being circumstantial. "That's a direct line," she said. Whitfield had legitimate access to those email chains from her own administrative role. If Cho got the raw material from her under a false pretense, and Deborah Coulson had a documented motive tied to her son's promotion board, we're not looking at random gossip anymore. We're looking at a deliberate campaign with 3 touch points. I want Whitfield willing to state that on record. She said she would. "Then we're close," Anand said. "But I need you to understand something before we go further. This is going to get worse before it gets better. When people realize the paper trail is closing in on them, they don't usually get quiet. They get louder, or they get desperate. Be ready for that." I didn't have to wait long to find out what desperate looked like. 2 days before the formal review board convened, I was in the motor pool office finishing routine equipment sign-offs, the unglamorous rhythm of the job that had nothing to do with medals or complaints, just checklists and initialed forms, when Bragg found me, holding his phone. "You need to see this," he said, and turned the screen toward me. It was a message thread, forwarded from a spouse group chat Bragg had access to through his wife. Deborah Colson had written, to a dozen other spouses, that the real story behind my medal was about to come out at the review board, and that people should be prepared for what kind of officer this base has been protecting. She named me directly. She used the word disgraceful. "She's not waiting for the board to decide anything," I said quietly. "No," Bragg said. "She's trying to convict you in the group chat before anyone official gets a chance to. That's not confidence, Lieutenant. That's panic." He was right, and it told me something important. Whatever was in that formal complaint, whoever had built it, they were more afraid of what the review board might actually uncover than they wanted anyone to know. The review board room was smaller than I expected, a rectangular table, government beige walls, a single window with the blinds half drawn. Colonel Grace Hutchins sat at the center, flanked by 2 other officers I didn't recognize. She had the folder in front of her, closed, for the first 10 minutes of the proceeding, while she asked me procedural questions about the task force timeline. I answered everyone plainly, the way Anand had coached me, no defensiveness, no extra words, just facts, backed by the documentation I'd rebuilt that long evening 2 weeks earlier. Then Hutchins opened the folder. "Lieutenant, I want to walk through the email excerpt submitted as supporting evidence in this complaint," she said, sliding a printed page across the table. "Major Cho, this was submitted under your signature. Can you explain the source of this document?" Cho, seated at the far end of the table, shifted in his chair. "I received it from a colleague," he said. "I believed it was accurate." "It isn't," Hutchins said. "Our office ran a metadata comparison against the original email server logs. This excerpt removes 11 lines of context from the middle of the conversation, lines that, when restored, describe Lieutenant Reyes and Colonel Colson discussing convoy risk assessments at 2 in the morning during an active security window. Not a personal relationship. A supply chain emergency." She looked up. Someone edited a document to misrepresent a life-or-death logistics conversation as evidence of favoritism. "I'd like to know who." The room went very still. "I received it from Captain Whitfield's files," Cho said, too quickly. "I gave him raw scheduling data," Whitfield said from her seat near the door, standing before anyone asked her to. "Not an edited excerpt. I never touched the content of that email chain. If it was cut down to look like something else, that happened after it left my hands." "Then who edited it?" Hutchins asked. The door opened before Cho could answer, and Colonel Colson walked in, retired paperwork already filed, technically no longer required to be anywhere near this proceeding, but there nonetheless, in civilian clothes that somehow still looked pressed like a uniform. "I asked to be added to this hearing as a witness," he said. "I think I can answer that question." Hutchins gestured for him to continue. "My wife has access to my old email archive," Colson said, and I watched something in his face cost him to say it. "She's used it before to help me organize records during the retirement transition. I found, 2 days ago, that someone had exported a portion of the task force correspondence to a personal drive. I didn't do that. I confronted her about it. She admitted she pulled it, edited it down, and gave it to Major Cho, because she genuinely believed, that Lieutenant Reyes's advancement had come at the cost of our son's career, and she wanted, in her words, someone else to make it official so it wouldn't look like it came from us." Deborah Colson had not been called as a witness to that hearing. She hadn't needed to be. Her husband had just put everything she'd tried to keep at arm's length directly into the record, in a voice that clearly hated having to do it. Cho's face had gone pale. "I didn't know it had been edited," he said. "I want that on record. I was angry about the promotion board. I let that anger make me careless about verifying what I was given. That's on me. But I didn't fabricate it. That distinction matters," Hutchins said, "and it will be reflected. But carelessness with a false formal complaint still carries consequences, Major." Then came the twist none of us had been expecting. Whitfield, still standing, spoke again. "There's something else," she said. "Deborah didn't just target Lieutenant Reyes. Last year, she spread something similar about a different officer, Captain Renata Ibarra, before she transferred out. Same pattern. A rumor about favoritism, timed around a promotion cycle where Deborah's son was competing. I didn't connect it until this week. I think Lieutenant Reyes is the second officer this has happened to, not the first." Hutchins made a note, her expression unreadable, but her pen moved with the particular weight of someone who now had two open threads instead of one. "Lieutenant Reyes," Hutchins said finally, closing the folder. "For the record, are you aware what she actually did? Captain Whitfield, in coming forward, and Colonel Coulson, in choosing to testify against his own wife's conduct rather than protect her from it. Two people risked something to make sure this record reflected the truth. I think you should know that, whatever else comes out of today. I hadn't known, not fully, until that moment, how much it had cost both of them to be in that room. The findings came down 11 days later. My medal and promotion recommendation were upheld in full, with an official notation clearing me of any impropriety. Major Cho received a formal reprimand for submitting fabricated evidence without verifying its authenticity, along with a mandatory ethics review, a serious mark on his record, but not an end to his career. He came to my desk the week after the findings were released, stood there a long moment before he spoke. "I let being passed over turn into something ugly," he said. "I'm not asking you to forget that. I just wanted to say it to your face instead of leaving it in a file. It wasn't a full redemption. But it was more honesty than I'd expected, and I chose to accept it as a start." Deborah Coulson's case was referred outside the informal channels of base life entirely, a formal review of misuse of official correspondence, separate from her husband's now completed retirement. She was removed from her position leading the Officers' Spouses Club. Colonel Coulson, I heard later, requested a legal separation not long after. I don't know all the details of that, and it isn't mine to tell. What I do know is that he never once tried to make his testimony about his own discomfort. He said what was true, even though it cost him the most. Captain Sarah Whitfield and I ended up working 2 more assignments together after that, and somewhere in the second one, colleague quietly became friend. She never asked me to forgive the months she'd spent half believing a lie about me. I told her once that the apology mattered less to me than the moment she chose to walk into that break room and correct it. That was the version of her I chose to know. Master Sergeant Bragg got his recommendation for promotion to Sergeant Major that same review cycle, on merit that had nothing to do with any of this, but I made sure, in every conversation I had with anyone who'd listen, that his name came up as the reason I hadn't faced this alone. 1 year later, I stood in a different ballroom, at a different event, this time pinning on my own captain's bars, Bragg, now Sergeant Major Bragg, standing just off to the side with the same dry, satisfied expression he'd worn the day he first told me the rumor had wings. Whitfield was there too, holding 2 drinks, one of which she handed me before I'd even finished shaking the last hand in the receiving line. I think about that sentence sometimes. She only got that award through favors, and what it taught me. Not everyone who doubts you is your enemy, and not everyone who defends you owes you anything. Sometimes the truth doesn't need you to fight for it. It just needs enough people willing to say what they actually saw. If this story meant something to you, tell me in the comments which moment hit hardest. I read every one. And if you want more stories like this, make sure you're subscribed, because there's another one coming soon.